Research Center showing that almost approaching 70% of the US public are having a negative view on China. And if you track Pew Research Center's historic data, that is historically high. In the previous years and in past history, we've usually see a kind of like half and half, kind of positive versus negative, with a slightly larger number of negative views on China, but we don't see a huge gap between positive versus negative. But now recently, we saw a very dramatic drop in terms of how many people, the percentage of people who are having negative views on China, almost approaching to 70%, due to COVID-19 and some other issues. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, this trend kind of echo with the media portrayal of China. I was sifting through the research articles on US media's portrayal of China, and the data dated back to the 1950s. And what we saw in US media's portrayal of China has been negative, but very stable. So we see a few peaks here and there, and of course, recently about negative reports on China, we see the peaks there. But historically, it has been a little bit more negative than positive, with a few peaks here and there. Those kind of negative image stay consistent, and a lot of scholars have found out that those kind of media portrayals has followed whether the US government see China as a friend or as an ally, or as an enemy. This is not to say the media did a bad job. This is to say that media followed closely with how the government thought about China and reported what the government thought about China historically. And of course, the media's negative portrayal of China and overall the more negative than positive view of China among the US public has definitely impacted international businesses. And in fact, geopolitics has always impacted international businesses. Some people, including the general public and some government entities, tend to lash out their dissatisfactions with a foreign country's policy to businesses from that country. For example, in 2015, in Morocco, Morocco's interior ministry blocked the IKEA store's grand opening in Morocco as a response to their dissatisfaction to Sweden's foreign policy. And last year, Forbes reported that during the Singles' Day sales event in China in November the 11th, which is the largest online shopping event in China, much larger than the scale we have on Black Friday here. 78% of Chinese shoppers said that they would boycott American brands due to the trade war and some other issues. And I'm sure that you've seen similar trends when American people say we are going to boycott made in China products. And we have actually tested those phenomenon in one of my studies. In my recent study with a colleague from North Carolina State University, we ran a study on how a Chinese company with an international branch in the US should respond to an online fake news. And what we found out was that when the US participants read an article about China being a friend of the US, those participants prefer to see the Chinese company to take a very defensive stance and accuse the people who fabricated the news and attack the accuser. However, when those US participants read an article depicting China as a threat of the US, those participants prefer the Chinese company to take a very accommodative stance and apologize, even though the company did nothing wrong and was actually being attacked by fake news. Of course, the experiment itself was a little bit more nuanced and complicated than that, but one of the biggest takeaway is that media portrayal of a foreign country did show impact on how those corporations and international businesses from that country should practice their public relations and media presence differently so that they can receive a more favorable view.